The audience here is way bigger than the last time I was with the Kitsap Club. I think like most of the mycological societies, starting about the pandemic time, a lot of people started joining clubs and got hooked into mushrooms. So if this is your first year mushrooming, or maybe you just joined the club, or maybe you're not even in the club yet, how about a show of hands? Usually it's about 50%. Yeah, that's about 50%. So that's awesome. It's amazing how popular mushrooming has begun. So anyways, there'll be a lot of basics about fungi here, so you'll get hopefully something out of the talk. So, and we'll learn about how a resilient planet needs fungi now. Okay, so anyways, this book here, I have one copy here tonight, unfortunately a desk copy that you can take a look at, but you can buy it anywhere. It's on Amazon, or some people said they already have it. It came out a couple of years ago. When the publisher, Princeton University Press, approached me to doing this book, they said they wanted a book that was sort of like a college textbook, and I've taught university mycology several times, but they wanted it more for general audiences, so a lot of fungal basics, but then also a lot of the aforementioned wacky stories. So that's sort of what the gist of the book is. But as it turned out, as I was putting it together, it seemed to be there were sort of two main themes kind of running through the book. And one of the themes is a lot of stuff we knew about fungi for decades, you know, when I was an undergrad and a graduate student, et cetera. A lot of the what we thought were facts about fungi, turns out just recently, in the last few years, a lot of those facts ain't necessarily so. There's been a bunch of really interesting discoveries just recently about fungi that have caused us to change our textbooks. And then the other main theme about this book is that much of the fifth kingdom, the kingdom of fungi, is hidden in plain sight all around us. So I'll show you some examples of stuff like that tonight too. You'll see mushrooms from far-flung places of the planet like the Amazon rainforest and Australia and stuff like that. And wouldn't it be great to be able to see those? Unfortunately, I'll never get there. But you'll see fungi that are just as incredible and bizarre that you've never heard of, and you could find them like right outside the door here, right outside the door of your house. You've never even noticed them before, and they do just as amazing things. So let's just sit back and let's see some fungi basics. So the thing about fungi is, until very recently, they were pretty much all but ignored, right? So if you're my age, or older, or even not quite my age, if you can think back to high school, learning about fungi, in whatever your life science class was, fungi probably got covered maybe in one day. It was a really sad situation back then. And in fact, it might not have even been a full class on it. And also much of what you were taught, frankly, wasn't true to begin with. But if you think back to those days, sitting in that class, had you been paying attention, you probably would have learned that fungi are eukaryotes, much like us, and if you don't remember what a eukaryote is, I can tell you. So most life on the planet, of course, are bacteria. They've been on the planet for 1 billion years longer than all the other life. So bacteria are the most diverse life by far. Bacteria are quite simple. They're called prokaryotes. They're single-celled organisms with a cell wall and a membrane, and that's about it. They have other stuff inside, but no membrane-bound organelles. They have no nucleus, no ribosomes, no mitochondria. They don't have anything like that. They're really quite simplistic. All other life on the planet are eukaryotes, like our cells, fungi, plants, and protozoans. How to tell fungi and plants and animals apart, those different kingdoms, is actually pretty simple. It's based on the fact that plants have a cell wall and a cell membrane. The cell wall is made of cellulose. Fungi have a cell wall and a cell membrane. The cell wall is made of chitin. Animal cells have a cell membrane and no cell wall whatsoever. So that's pretty much how you tell the difference between those organisms. On the tree of life, as organisms evolved on the planet, and we get to more and more complex things, fungi and plants came from a common ancestor. So we're more closely related with fungi than to any of the other life forms on the planet. Fungi were classified for a long time as plants because, well, they weren't animals, but it turns out they're actually more closely related to us. And you probably knew this or suspected it, even if you didn't know anything about fungi, because fungi, cells, metabolism, physiology, enzymes are very similar to our own cells. If you get a bacterial infection, it's very easy to get rid of that. You can eat a shovel full of antibiotics that won't harm your cells because we don't have bacterial processes in our cells like bacteria, easy to cure. If you get a fungal infection, like a toenail fungus or ringworm or athlete's foot, There's not been very many medications for these things over the years, and there still aren't really all that many. And it's because the cells are so similar to our own that it's difficult to poison fungal infections in our body without poisoning our own cells. So anyways, you probably suspected fungi in animals were most similar. Fungi are quite diverse, and as we'll see, a lot of different habitats with fungi, not just wet, moist habitats like around here, some places you might not expect. And then also, they remain poorly understood and mostly not known. The vast majority of fungi on the planet we probably don't know about yet and have never seen and don't have a name for them. Something like maybe 1 to 5% maybe of all the fungi on the planet have we discovered and put names on, which is pretty hard to believe. Each year there's few, if any, new mammals discovered, birds, fish, etc. Most of what's on the planet we already know about. The vast majority of fungi we do not know about and have not seen and don't have a name for them. So if you're really excited about studying something and want to discover something new and don't feel like doing astronomy, mycology is pretty much the way to go. If you want to make a discovery in, say, like nuclear physics or surgery, you can't really be an amateur doing that, of course. You have to have specialized equipment or a license or something like that. But anyone can contribute to the science of mycology, and citizen scientists now, all the time, every single week, are making new discoveries. It's really exciting time. Okay, so let's just talk about how diverse fungi are and where you might see them. It would be no surprise to anyone here, or to people back in the Midwest where I live, that the Pacific Northwest has lots of fungi. There's a lot of trees and other plant material in the forest, and it's wet much of the year, so no surprise. But the places on the planet where some fungi dominate are some of the driest places on the planet, believe it or not. So the tops of mountains and deserts, and even in Antarctica, believe it or not, that some of the dominant life forms are fungi. There's not a life forms to begin with in some of these places because it's so harsh, but when you start looking to see what's growing there, a lot of times the dominant forms, believe it or not, are fungi. The scene up in the top left here, and I guess they can probably see it at Zoom, on the people dialing by Zoom. Okay, so the scene up at the top here in the top left photo, that's a shot of Antarctica. In that field of view, you can see many, many miles across that valley. And what do you see? Not a whole lot. It looks like a desert. Antarctica, of course, is extremely cold, windy, very dry, and extremely harsh UV light because there's a hole over the ozone layer. So there's not a lot of organisms that live there. In that field of view, you see a lot of rocks. Looks like a desert anywhere else. There's some scrubby plants, and all of those plants may be one species or two species. There's not very many plants there. There's not going to be any fish, amphibians, probably no mammals. There's maybe a few types of insects, maybe one bird might fly across, and that's about it. Believe it or not, if that, in that extremely dry, harsh hellscape of a place to try to make a living, the dominant life there are fungi. Isn't that insane? So where are they? Well, there's a lot of them underground, of course, and maybe partners with some of those plants, and that might be the whole secret to how those plants can survive. But all of those rocks, if you were to start breaking open the rocks and looking inside the rocks, you would see all of these different kind of colored bands just under the surface. They're dark, and then they also are kind of greenish. These are types of lichens that live inside of rocks, believe it or not. Endolithic lichens, inside of rocks.
Wow.
Have you ever heard of these before? No one had ever heard of them before until just a few years ago. Someone went to Antarctica and started breaking open the rocks. And amazingly enough, that's where the fungi are. They're in the form of these lichens, which are sort of a colony of a fungus with a photobiont or more than one photobiont that photosynthesizes like an algae or a cyanobacterium, and that's where the carbohydrates come from its photosynthetic partner, and then the fungus is sort of the body of the organism. They're just under the surface of these porous rocks because the UV light is so harsh and damaging, it would fry a lot of organisms. It's also very windy, dry, and extremely cold, so being on the surface would be a lot harder to do. So these guys have figured out if they can be just under the surface, enough light comes through these first couple millimeters or so of the rock that enough light gets through for photosynthesis. Isn't this incredible? So in this place you would think fungi would be the last organism you would find there, or maybe fish, but it turns out fungi are some of the dominant organisms. In this book that I did, The Lives of Fungi, and also this little book of fungi, there's a lot of fungal basics. The chapters are kind of broken up by topics, so reproduction or chemistry, etc. And there's a number of basics there that you would see in any other sort of textbook. And then the second half of the chapter are a lot of examples of crazy fungi and how they do these sorts of things, how they do their physiologies or their reproduction, etc. So let's look at some more basics. So back to that class. In high school, on that day, if you were still paying attention when the teacher was droning on and clearly not inspired by fungi, if he or she said anything about them, they probably said what? That fungi are saprobes and rot things. You know, there's autotrophic organisms like plants that can make their own food, and then there's heterotrophs like us or fungi that have to eat the things that made their own energy from the sun. And so that's what fungi do. They're not autotrophic, they're heterotrophic like us. And you probably learned they're saprotrophic, more specifically, they rot stuff and decompose things. And it's a pretty good thing we have these, right? Because as you probably learned, we will be buried under all of this organic matter piling up were it not for the fungi. And as preposterous as that sounds, it's actually pretty much true. And you can easily demonstrate this. If you start digging down through the soil, you'll go through layers, 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 deeper down, and you're of course going back in time. You go down deep enough layers in the soil, you'll get to fossil fuels, right? You'll get to petroleum and natural gas and coal, etc. And this was all made in a time where there was no wood rot fungi yet on the planet. There were other fungi, but wood rot fungi had not evolved yet. Trees were already around, and as this material died and fell to the ground and piled up, nothing decayed it. Rotting woody material is actually a pretty neat trick. Some fungi can do it and nothing else. So mammals can't digest woody material, and really bacteria can't either. Just some fungi can do this. And they weren't on the planet for a long, long time. Anyways, once they did evolve and start taking advantage of all this woody debris that was lying around, then those fungi proliferated. So if you start now going back up through the soil layers, you'll get to a layer where there's spores of fungi that are wood rot fungi. There's spores of fungi in all of the layers, and pollen from plants too, because it doesn't really degrade, it fossilizes. So you can get in a layer just above the top layer of where the fossil fuels are, and in that band of soil, and all the bands above it, you'll see spores of wood rot fungi, and you won't see any more fossil fuels made. That's because wood rot fungi had evolved and they digest all of this stuff, so there's not going to be any more petroleum and coal made because fungi are rotting it all. So that's pretty amazing, and that's been demonstrated by many, many scientists in many studies. So while most fungi aren't really saprobes, and I'll show you what they do most of the time, many of them are, and they're actually pretty cool to think about and to see in the woods and to see how they work. While walking in the woods, you've probably seen wood that look like one of these two pictures, right? So as you're walking along, you've seen wood that gets kind of a red blocky look as the log has gotten more and more rotted and kind of starts falling apart. It falls apart, looks like this. And sometimes you've seen logs that probably are well rotted and falling apart and look kind of like this guy here, this kind of white stringy wood. And you probably thought to yourself, oh, well, I don't know what kind of tree that was. Of course, it's too far gone to know what kind of tree it was. But whatever it was, when it falls down and starts rotting and falls apart, that kind of tree always does this, or this kind of tree always does that. If you thought that, you're actually wrong. It doesn't really have so much to do with what kind of a tree it is, how it falls apart, but it has everything to do with what fungi got to it first and started rotting it. Because fungi that attack wood and result in something like this are called brown rot fungi. Mycologists are very clever with their naming. So wood left behind that looks brown and rotted, that's caused by brown rot fungi. Okay. And so what's going on here? Well, as I mentioned, to rot woody material is a pretty neat trick. And the reason is because wood is a carbohydrate made of all of these linked together molecules of cellulose, and they're linked together with bonds going in 3 different dimensions. And these bonds are very difficult to break. Each one of the bonds takes a special enzyme to break that bond. And not a lot of organisms to do this. This is a good thing for plants. This is how they get their structure. You know, for a long time, plants were really small, creeping things like liverworts, and then they get shaded by other plants, and that's a problem. So they figured out how to grow upright and make stems, and they need the cellulose to have a lot of structure. So anyways, the cellulose is what comprises the cell walls and gives them structure. Between all of the cellulose, there's also this kind of cement-like material called lignin, and it's also equally tough to break down in different ways. So fungi can break down woody material by basically digesting the cellulose or the lignin, but not both really very well. So even wood rot fungi aren't that good at breaking down wood because it's just so difficult to digest. Brown rot fungi break down the cellulose and remove it, leaving behind the lignin, and that's why you get all this brown blocky material. Conifers often are attacked by brown rot fungi. So very often if you're in a conifer forest, a lot of the wood looks like this, but again, it's actually mostly due to the fungi. And these are fungi that you're familiar with. So the red-belted polypore, Fomitopsis pinicula, Phalinus species, Letoporus, which is the sulfur shelf or chicken of the woods, and then Phalish phainitzii, the Dyer's polypore, which you've probably seen quite a bit at the base of conifers around here. All those are brown rot fungi. So if you were to look inside the tree that they're working on, you would see the wood is starting to look like this in the root or in the heartwood of the tree. Conversely, the white rot fungi typically break down more of the lignin and some of the cellulose, and then leave a lot of the cellulose behind. A lot of hardwoods end up like this, but again, both brown rot and white rot fungi can attack either hardwoods or conifers. It's just that typically there's a lot of hardwoods that end up like this. And so Basidiomycete as well as Ascomycete fungi can do this white rot thing. So some things you've heard of, some Ascomycetes like the Xylaria polymorpha and other Xylaria species, the dead man's fingers, Chlorosiboria, this cute little blue-green cup, and Pisiza species, these big brown cups. These are Ascomycetes that are white rot fungi. And then there's also basidios that you probably know, like honey mushrooms, Armillaria species, oyster mushrooms, those are Pleurotus species, Ganodermas, those big conchs like artist conch, etc. And then also things like the turkey tail, Trametes. Those are also white rot fungi. So these are familiar to all of us. They're very common in the forest. And the neat thing about polypores is when they're on wood, they're usually all year round, even in winter. So a lot of our other favorite agarics have gone away and the boletes have gone away, but these are still sitting there that you can observe and see what they're doing. So anyways, it's kind of cool to see these things in action. Unfortunately, most of the time, all you see is them on the outside of the tree. This is a Phalinus species, and the photo's taken in Colorado, near Telluride, Colorado, where the Telluride Mushroom Festival is held every year. Shout out to them. The largest wild mushroom festival in North America happens every year in August. Shameless plug for the Fungi Festival. So when you see these guys on aspen trees, this Phalinus species, they're fairly hard to notice because on the side of the tree where branch scars are, the bark's kind of cracked and gnarly, and the conchs themselves even look like that. That's the top of the conch here. So I've purposely taken this photo from the underside so you can see the hymeneal layer where the pores are. It makes it a little easier to know what we're talking about here. There's a lot of different Phalinus species all around the northern hemisphere of the planet. They're super common. Most people know about them. They're some of the most common species, frankly, on the planet. Anyways, this is Phalinus tremuli. It occurs on quaking aspen or the trembling aspen and some other species as well. But to see what's going on the business end of this fungus, you'd have to go inside the tree, which you can't always do. But through the miracle of photography, we can do that. If you were to chop one of these off the tree and look inside, sure enough, where this conch is attached, that fungus has been rotting there for quite a long time. You can see that the wood's getting brown and blocky and starting to fall apart. As the fungus moves more into the woody tissue and starts to take over more of the material, you'll see something else. At these black lines, that's the front of how far the mycelium has moved through the wood. And these black lines are in the hyphae and are visible because of melanin. It's the same, more or less, molecule that we have in our skin cells, and other organisms produce melanin too. Lots of organisms do. And it's usually used for the same purpose, to protect the cells from damage, either from UV light or chemicals that the plant's immune system are trying to blast it with to kill it, et cetera, et cetera. You've probably seen these black lines before, called spalting, in wood of wooden bowls, guitars, cabinetry, something like that. that woodworkers like to use. And oftentimes they call the wood that these bowls or spoons or guitars are made of curly maple or bird's eye maple. Have you ever heard those names of that wood? Yeah, there's no such thing as a curly maple or a bird's eye maple. It's maple that has a fungus in it and the wood's been spalted. Very often where woodworkers get this wood is from something called a burl. That's a great big like cancerous growth almost on the side of the tree. So what that is, if you want to see one, just go down through any city, and wherever there's street trees, the trees get banged by cars, mowers whack the thing, weed whackers are whacking around the tree to cut down the pesky weeds. Well, you're damaging the cork of the tree and setting up an infection court in the tree where stuff can get through that thick corky skin that's there to protect the tree from invasion of pathogens. Well, now the next line of defense is the plant's immune system, and then it leads to this sort of a spalting reaction. The wood made from this type of wood is really quite pretty, and it has a fungal tie-in, so pretty cool. And a number of other fungi do this as well. Here's a pipe that was given to me by a woodworker friend, and it's made from eastern sugar maple. I can tell right away by the grain of this wood, this is beautiful sugar maple, and it had a fungus growing in it, which of course is starting to digest the wood. It starts by bleaching the wood. You can see it's a lot lighter where the fungus is in here, and then where this black line is, that's as far as the fungus has advanced into the wood, and that's the spalting lines and the melanin being laid down. So quite pretty to see. The wood hasn't rotted and fallen apart yet. It's still totally intact, but given enough time, of course, that would happen. Some other fungi that I mentioned the Chlorosaborea, those cute little blue-green cups. They're super tiny. You don't always see the cups, the fruit bodies. You might just see the wood that looks like someone spray painted it blue-green, but if you tear through the wood, the color's all the way through. So someone didn't paint it, but it's a very unusual, unnatural-looking color. Well, if you got to the wood at the right time of the year, you might see the little fruit bodies, little cups. If you got to the wood even way, way before that, the wood would still be totally intact and workable and solid, but it would already be stained that color. And you can see a little chip of that type of wood right here. Have you ever heard of Tunbridge ware before? This is a type of antique wooden boxes that were sold in Tunbridge Wells, England, which is kind of in the southeast. During the late 1800s, there's some spas there, and people went there, I don't know, to seek relief from consumption or vacationing or what, I don't know what they were doing. But anyways, woodworkers there that were already making all kinds of wood inlay things for churches and furniture and stuff like that. They hit upon making these little boxes that they could sell and pick up extra money for the tourists coming through, and they put these elaborately colored different types of wood in the inlay on the top and on the sides. And some of them had special types of woods that not many of these woodworkers could figure out how to get their hands on. Things like green oak and pink oak and some other colors. Again, there's no green oak and pink oak and yellow oak. These are trees that have been attacked by this fungus, and the woodworker's secret to his success was knowing a mycologist, or someone at least knew about mushrooms and how to spot this wood that has this fungus in it, and then the wood could be cut up and used for these sorts of boxes. I have one, but this is not the one. This one has an especially dark green that shows up better in these slideshows, so I use it instead of mine. But it's pretty cool. Some of the scenes on the tops of the boxes might be a woodland scene with trees and foliage and stuff, so you could imagine having this weird green wood would be something that a lot of people couldn't get their hands on. Has anyone ever seen one of these before? They're extremely popular and well known in Britain. Like every family has one of these somewhere as an heirloom. They were only made for just a few decades in the late 1800s. In the New World, they're not so common. Mine came from the UK. I got it from an antique store. So they're pretty cool, and it has a fungal tie-in. You don't have to go back east or over in the UK to see these spalting lines. You can see them right outside your door. Other wood rot fungi and plant debris rot fungi make these spalting lines. This is a fungus that causes something called a needle cast. A number of fungi cause this situation called needle cast. This guy is called Lophodermium there we go. Oh, almost. It's called Lophodermium pinastri. Oh, there we go. Lophodermium pinastri. Have you ever heard of this fungus before?
No.
Almost no way. This is one of the most common fungi in the northern hemisphere of the entire planet. And you probably have it right outside your door. It's that common. This occurs in a lot of different types of pines, especially Scots pine, which of course is planted all over the world. And here's what happens. In fact, we don't even know entirely what happens. This fungus somehow gets into the plant and lives inside the needles, maybe as a pathogen, maybe as a mutualistic partner, an endophyte, we don't really even know. Lives inside the needles, and that's just what it does. When the needles fall off the tree, either because the fungus causes a disease and the plant sheds its needles, I don't think it's clear yet. But anyways, when the needles fall off the tree, that's when the fungus goes into reproductive mode, starts rotting the needles, and makes its mushrooms. Its mushrooms are not much to look at. They're these little black pustules. Those are all the fruit bodies of this little guy. But what's even cooler is inside of any given needle, despite the fact that needles are really small, within a single needle, there's actually several different individuals or colonies of Lithodermium pinastri. And so to block the turf of one guy's part of the needle off from the turf of another guy, they spalt the needle. So wherever there's red lines, you can see a black line straight across the needle. They're all over the place. So presumably this little patch here, that's one individual fungus or one little colony, and this is a different one here, and this is a different one here. Here's another line. They're all over the place. Here's another one. Isn't that cool? So, so obviously these aren't as exciting to see as morels or amanitas. There's something. In case you're going to ask about culinary notes or how to prepare, I don't know. You're probably going to need a whole lot. I'm going to guess they probably taste a lot like pine needles. But anyways, pretty cool fungus with a neat story. And I mean, who's seen this thing, even though they're probably right outside your door? Pretty cool. Oh, what's the, don't you advance it?
Sorry.
Does it time out or something, maybe?
I think it's because I clicked on the the interface for Zoom, so.
It does one or the other.
Yeah.
So, okay, so just to switch gears a little bit, if you're, as long as you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably seen a lot of different publications and programs on TV, et cetera, that are covering a global climate change phenomenon right now and all of the things that's causing droughts and monsoons and hurricanes and fires and everything. And it's upsetting a lot of things on the planet. It's upsetting a lot of organisms on the planet too. And Fungi magazine, which I've published for many years, is no different. We typically publish 4 seasonal issues per year, which cover seasonal mushrooms and seasonal mushroom cooking and all that sort of business. And then we always have one special topics issue every year on whatever. And this particular year, a couple years ago, I think, we covered all of these sorts of problems going on the planet, where the planet's getting kind of out of whack. And of course, you can't possibly read the words around this centerfold. That doesn't really much matter. In this issue, we covered a lot of different topics. Global species loss and invasive species and insecticide use and fires and deforestation, droughts, global warming, all sorts of things, pollution. We covered a lot of these topics, and many of these topics had stories about mycologists who are working right now to solve these problems using fungi, like using fungi to solve problems of invasive pests on agricultural crops rather than using insecticides and other poisons, spraying native fungi that live as an epiphyte on top of plants, and basically just spraying them on top of the plant and increasing the numbers so they sort of crowd out other pest species. Have you ever heard about doing this? This has become kind of a hot topic in research. So this is a pretty interesting issue, very enjoyable for me to put together, and it was quite popular and lots of requests for PDFs from some of the articles in this edition. So it was pretty cool. Anyways, you probably already know that fungi can help make a more resilient planet, make the environment better. You probably have, if you have a compost pile at your house, there's fungi working there to make soil. You probably know a bit about mutualistic fungi that benefit plants, trees, etc. So you probably already have an idea that fungi are helping to make the planet more resilient. How they're making the planet more resilient is something that's being studied because we're not entirely sure what goes on at the genetic level, at the chemical level, etc. So I'll show you a few stories about fungi making the planet more resilient. So this club, the Kitsap Club, is one of the NAMA clubs, one of the clubs that are part of this sort of umbrella organization, the North American Mycological Association, which is the umbrella for something like 100 of these clubs I've done presentations at more NAMA clubs than anyone ever in history. And so because of that, even more than Gary Linkoff or Tom Volk, and because of that, MSA, the Mycological Society of America, the academic society, which I'm also a member of, they've tapped me to be the liaison between both organizations to help get the word out to people in clubs that there's other things going on too. There's other journals out there, there's other events, there's other conferences if you want to get involved. So there's a whole bunch of different things going on out there, and there's really no limit to what you can do. So the upshot of a lot of this business of looking at what's in the environment, collecting things, of course that's to find out what we have in the environment and get a good baseline of mushrooms right now, and other species too, because as habitat is lost and populations of species become more simple, we would like to know what we had at this starting point to be able to gauge whether or not this is happening. So this is valuable work, but at the same time, I'm more interested in not so much what we have in the forests, but what are they doing there? So are these fungi saprotrophic? Are they mutualistic with trees? Are we seeing invasive species coming in? A lot of that sort of stuff I've long been interested in and studied ecology and evolution of fungi. So even some of the fungi that we're most familiar with, looking into what they do in nature has led to some amazing discoveries. There's probably no group of mushrooms on the planet worldwide that's more well known and excites more people than morels, right? I mean, everybody knows about morels. Even if you're just a beginner in this club, you probably already knew about morels. Is this the first time anyone's ever heard of a morel before? If you raise your hand, I know someone's going to throw something. You just have to know about morels. So they're the most pursued of wild mushrooms. For most people, they're the most enjoyed and most enjoyable. They're the most lied about, the most bragged about. Everyone's just like fish. People in the spring are bragging how many pounds of morels they found until you go over to their house and they're like, oh, I can't take you to my spot. There weren't any morels there. It's a really bad year. And there's always all of these sorts of excuses. But as well known as morels are, there's some things about them that we've only figured out just recently, which is incredible to think. Back where I live in the Midwest, most of the morels that we see look like these guys here. You might call them like blondes or naturals or something like that. And you have morels like that out here. But you also have burn morels. If I was in front of a group of people in Illinois or Wisconsin and I said, well, we of course also have burn morels, they would immediately throw stuff at me because of course we don't have them. We've never seen them. We've never seen them because we've never had burns. The burn morels, I'm here to tell you, are always there. They're always everywhere. You just never see them until there's a fire, like was what happened here. This guy's crawling around gathering up lots and lots of them the year after a big forest fire. So that this happens, this phenomenon, everyone's known about for centuries. In fact, in Europe, there's laws on the books that tell people you may not burn down the forest to cause this to happen. I'm not kidding, because people were doing it because they learned that this would happen the next year. So that it happens, we've known for a long, long time. How it happens, we've never known until just recently. So in fact, when I was a kid and then a student, I knew about this, and people would ask me, or I would ask people what's going on, and there's a lot of theories about what's happening. Something about maybe the heat of the fire is releasing something in the soil that causes the spores to germinate, and then these mushrooms pop up, or somehow it alters chemistry of the soil. Somehow the smoke maybe lures in, like a siren song, the spores from the air to come to this area, or changes the wind climate. I've seen lots and lots of theories about how this works, and none of them really have panned out. Well, someone got the bright idea to look around in nature for these things and found out that it turns out in these burn areas, the morels were already there. They were always there. They're probably always everywhere. We just don't see them until there's a fire. I get asked a lot about the paper that found this out and showed convincingly this. I get asked so much, so I put the reference here if you want to look it up from fungal biology. Basically what scientists did was started looking inside the plants in the area where the burn happens, and they found of course, plant material inside the plants. They also found fungal material in the plants. And when they looked at what the fungus material was using DNA sequence analysis, it was the morels. So some morels are saprobes and rot things, some are not. Some live inside of the plants as an endophyte. Or maybe a pathogen or a mutualist, we don't really know. We could call it an endophyte because it lives inside the plant. So what this says is the fungus is living inside the plant its whole life, maybe forever, and never going into sexual reproductive mode and never making mushrooms. But then when a fire comes through and damages its host, then it goes into reproductive mode and basically says, you know, I'm out of here, I'm gonna make spores and take off. And if the tree's not killed, presumably the fungus then has some sort of ability to maybe help jumpstart the tree to come back online. So a lot of trees are co-evolved with fires. We call them pyrophilous trees. They're basically fire-loving. There's trees that live in fire-prone areas. They've been there forever, millions of years it's been fire-prone. So in fact, they have mechanisms to save them from fire and protect them. Maybe big, thick, corky bark, like some trees have. Some conifers have cones that sit on the tree. They're called serotinous. They sit on the tree forever. They never fall off, they never open. But once a big fire comes through, it melts the thick coating of wax off of the cones. And then days later, after things cool down, then the cones start opening up without the wax on them, and the seeds fall down into this perfectly made sort of seed bed for them, and then they start growing again. So that fires have been a part of a lot of ecosystems for millennia is easily demonstrated by organisms adapting to this, including fungi, which you would think would be very sensitive to fire, but some of them seem to be attracted to these areas. And again, probably help to promote regrowth of the plants that they live inside of after fire. If you've been picking on a burn, you've probably seen this guy, right? Has anyone ever picked burn morels before? And you want to admit that you were doing it, I guess. A lot of people want to keep stuff a secret. Did you also see these little guys everywhere? If you're picking on a burn, you'll see these little tiny cups. It's a fairly close relative of a morel. They're really small, so nobody picks them, but the ground will be carpeted with them. This one's Geopixus carbonaria, and it too lives as an endophyte inside of the plant, and you know, maybe you would never see it until a fire comes through. And there's other things as well. In Australia, there's this extremely rare mushroom, or so we thought, called Lacocephala mylidi, the stone maker mushroom. It's also known as Aboriginal bread. Have you ever heard of this guy before? I had never really heard of it before either. So before the big fires that were sweeping all of Australia, I think it was 4 years ago, up until that time, if you'd gone on iNaturalist or Mushroom Observer, you would see, I think maybe one observation in history, or maybe two, of this fungus. This is the thing, if this thing was fruiting in the forest, you'd see it. The mushrooms are big as a dinner plate. You can see they're massive. And furthermore, it's attached to this great big thing underground, this big sclerotium. But nobody ever saw it. And when this book was being put together, I wanted photos of it. So at the time, I was looking for things on MO and other places, and there just weren't very many observations, even though I'd heard about it, I'd seen drawings of it. But at one time, it was so common in Australia that Aboriginal people, when it was the right season, would purposely go looking just for this to bring back as food. So something's going on. In fact, this great big tuber-like sclerotium, you can see how big it gets. You can slice it in half, and it's very starchy, and again, First Nation people in Australia used it for food. So what was going on back then that it seemed to be fairly common, and now all of a sudden it's almost extinct, or at least we never see it? Well, the same thing happened in Australia as in the New World. Europeans arrived and suppressed fire, and now some of these pyrophilous fungi we don't see anymore. The Australians, the native Australians, much like Native Americans in certain places where they lived, they would burn the vegetation to induce regrowth, which would then stimulate game and wildlife to come into the area that they would hunt. And the Aboriginals did that too. And they also knew that after fire, this guy would start fruiting, and they would dig these things up. Isn't that pretty cool? Anyways, after the fires in Australia, mushroom that people in the mushroom clubs in Australia had never ever seen in their whole life, now they were seeing these everywhere. Because part of its habitat and its niche now had come back. It has evolved with fire, and it needs fire to induce fruiting. So pretty cool story. Anyways, after the fire, of course, it looks pretty sad because the trees are all burned up and the vegetation's burned up. You might see some things sprouting in the soil. as sad as it looks, that's really not the problem, the fire coming through and burning everything up. The real problem is what happens later on when the rains come and start washing away the soil because there's no plants on it. If this happens repeatedly, eventually there's no topsoil and you basically have a desert and then nothing will grow there. And this actually has happened many places. It's happening right now in Haiti. If you look at satellite images of Hispaniola, half of Haiti is this very lush Dominican Republic. The other half is basically now a desert. And what's going on there is much of the people use charcoal to cook on, and charcoal is made by heating wood and then burying it, and it gets reduced and turns into true charcoal. And in Dominican Republic, the people have been much better stewards of the forest, and they replant forests after they cut trees down and this sort of thing. But in Haiti, that hasn't really happened. So they've basically removed pretty much all of the trees. It's tropical, so the rains wash away the soil, and now really nothing will grow there. It's become a desert. If you don't believe me, you can go on Google Earth right now and see satellite images of Haiti. There's a perfectly straight line dividing the two halves of the country in half. The Haiti side looks brown on the other side. On the other side of this perfectly straight line is green. So it's a really sad situation, but it's going to keep getting worse, because until you can sort of get some things growing on the soil to hold on to the soil, it's going to keep washing away more and more, and it just eventually kind of gets out of control. There's people that study post-fire regeneration of forests to try to keep that from happening. And with global climate change, fires are becoming much more frequent and bigger and hotter, so we need to have a handle on how to get forests growing again. This is Camille Stevens-Ruman. She's a scientist at Colorado State University and a world's authority on post-fire regeneration of forests. Her husband, Seth Davis, works on pine bark beetle, which is what kills the trees that then leads to the fires, so their work complements one another. I've had both of them at the Telluride Mushroom Festival to talk about this issue, because if you've ever driven through the Rocky Mountains, and in particular in Colorado, you'll see these massive swaths of forest that's totally dead. It's been killed by these pine bark beetles, and it's basically just a big forest fire waiting to happen, all that fuel sitting there. The business with the pine bark beetle, turns out, isn't that it's an invasive species. It's always been there for millions of years. But probably because of global climate change, the winters now are shorter and milder, and so now the beetle populations seem to be building up bigger and bigger. They kind of get out of hand, and the trees can't, they get overwhelmed, and then they get killed off by the beetles. So what's going on here is she's looking into different fungi that you can inoculate the trees with to give them a jump start. These fungi are mutualistic partners, and they give the tree a jump start in these bare soils. And you can see the trees all around her are putting on 2 or 3 feet per year. They're growing like crazy, and this isn't because of fertilizer or anything, it's just because of their fungal partners. So a situation like this is really nice. In just a few years, the trees will be tall and lush and nice again, but the real beauty is that they're holding onto the soil and not letting this problem turn into a much bigger problem down the road. Fires have always happened here. Fires have always happened in lots of habitats, and it's part of the ecology, and frankly, stopping the fires and preventing them is really a problem for a lot of species. So,
is it different species?
What's that?
Different species that they're planting, a tree,
Don't know. I would assume it's the same species that they were replanting. Yeah. So the Colorado, the Rocky Mountains, much like out here, there's not a whole lot of species diversity. There's a fair number of species, a lot of conifers. It's not like, say, in the Northwoods of North America or the Appalachians, where there's really, really high tree diversity and a lot of different hardwoods. So when you drive through Colorado and look at the trees, there's not that many species. There, ponderosa pine, Colorado spruce, Engelmann spruce, some things that you would see out here. For sure, ponderosa pine. Ponderosa pine has the largest range of, I think, any tree in North America, for sure any conifer. So that you see it out there and in Colorado and pretty much all over, it's because it is everywhere. Okay, so back to some more fungal basics. Are we out of time? Oh, no, not quite out of time. Almost out of time. Enough time for a couple interesting stories. So, yeah, we got time. So, as I mentioned, unbeknownst, unlike what you learned in school that most fungi were saprobes, are probably really not. Most fungi seem to be biotrophic. That means they live with a living partner. and they can either be a pathogen or a mutualist, etc. Those are all considered symbionts. I point this out because a lot of people in the media use the term symbiont and symbiosis erroneously. They usually mean it to mean mutualistically beneficial, but it doesn't have to be that way. Symbionts are just two organisms whose lives are closely intertwined. So COVID-19 virus and humans are symbionts. One clearly is disastrous for the other, but they're still considered symbionts. So mutualistic partners, those are symbionts, but pathogens can be a symbiont with its host too. And so it turns out probably most of those actually are parasites. A lot of fungi are parasites, little bitty things that nobody pays much attention to because they don't make great big mushrooms. Anyone ever seen this tree before? This is on Vancouver Island. This is the largest known Sitka spruce. Pretty cool, huh? I like this photo. I'm the little human down there at the bottom beside this thing. And then way up above my head precariously is a great big agaricon mushroom that's like the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. And I was hoping they would hurry up and take the photo because if this thing let loose, I was a goner. Further up, it's off the photo, but further up in the canopy of the tree are a whole bunch more of these. This fungus is probably, it's Fomitopsis officinalis, by the way. It's probably been growing in this tree for centuries, many centuries, and it's a heart rot fungus. So this is one of the enigmatic things about fungi. There's a lot of weird things about them. Fungi are considered to be microbes, and they're studied by microbiologists, which means they're microscopic, but at the same time, some fungi are the largest organisms on the planet. This one individual Fomitopsis agaricon inside this tree probably weighs many, many tons, maybe hundreds of tons. It's a massive organism. Yeah, it's still a microbe, so go figure. Anyways, they're very cool to see in these old growth forests, and the mushroom is a polypore, of course, so it puts on a new layer of pores every year on the bottom, and they get taller and taller and taller.
There's one right there.
And I was going to say, I saw one right here. They're very cool to see in the forest. I used to think, because I was told they're very, very rare, but it turns out I don't think they're really that rare at all. I think people just don't know where and how to look for them. I've seen them on actually fairly young trees. They don't have to be on old growth trees.
Does it have to be a spruce?
I don't think so. I think it could be on 2 or 3 different species, but I'm not positive. I'm not super good with polypores in general, and this is something restricted to the Pacific Northwest, and I've never lived out here, so I don't actually know. I bet if you looked in Noah and Christian's book, it'll say all of the host species, probably, I bet. Good plug for them. And their Cascadia book, which is beautiful. Okay, so just a few last stories about mutualists. So while you're out picking a lot of these mushrooms that you like to see, amanitas, boletes, chanterelles, etc., you bend over and wrench them from the soil, and again, they're not saprobes, they're not rotting stuff, and in fact, they're not even coming from the soil. They're actually attached to the tree itself. They're attached to the roots of the tree, where they're basically farming the tree. They're bringing in nutrients and water to the tree, and the tree is giving them photosynthate, or carbohydrates that it's making during photosynthesis. So how to see where they are attached to the tree? That's actually kind of a trick. If you were to look for the root tips of great big mature trees, those root tips could be anywhere. They could be deep in the soil or up near the surface. It's actually easier to find mycorrhizal fungi on the tips of little baby seedlings because you can dig up the entire tree. And so if you were to do that, this is what you would see. These are bristlecone pine seedlings that I dug up from New Mexico to bring back to my house in Illinois. And look at the little root tips there. You notice they're kind of fattened. They get fattened because the fungus grows into the tips. But they also look moldy, don't they? They're not moldy and rotting. That's actually the mycorrhizal fungus partner growing from the roots of the trees. And the hyphae might extend out into the soil and be attached to maybe an Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is a very common partner with this tree species. And so here's an example of the benefits of mycorrhizal fungi to their trees. If you were to sprout a seed inside of a glass container or up against a pane of glass, this is what you would see very quickly. The little baby tree sets down its roots down into the soil, of course. The roots only go to right here. That's as far as the roots go. This material here is not root. It's all fungus. It's mycorrhizal partner. Same with this little seedling here. Its roots go down to about right here. All of this is not root. It's fungus. You could quickly see that the mycorrhizal partner of this plant dramatically increases the root area, the surface area of the roots, and extends much further out into the soil than the roots do. And so again, what they do is they bring in water and nutrients to the tree. If when you were learning about fungi back in your high school class, and they happened to mention trees, or maybe it was tree day. They said, well, so here's the thing, here's how plants work. So you got the upper part where the leaves are and it's green, and that's where the photosynthesis happens and makes the food. There's the stem part that kind of holds that up in the air where the light is, and then down under the soil's the root. Of course, everyone knows, every dum-dum knows that's where the water comes in and the nutrients and stuff. Turns out that's not really true, especially not with trees. Dig up a tree and you'll see what the roots look like. It looks like a naked stem. Tree roots basically don't do much more than hold the tree down so it doesn't blow away on a windy day. The main heavy lifting of bringing in the water and the nutrients to the tree and other plants is actually the fungus. You know, you don't see root hairs and things like that on tree roots. The fungus is what's doing that. You know, this little cartoon sort of shows that. It shows the carbohydrates going into the fungus from the plant and the nutrients going into the plant from the fungus. This cartoon here on the far right shows sort of a cutaway of what those root tips that I showed you would look like. The fungus, you can see it on the surface of the root. It looks moldy, but it's also actually growing into the tissues of the tree and between the cells in the case of ectomycorrhizal fungi. There's even some other types of fungi that are probably a lot more common, but they're more mysterious and we don't really know much about them, called endomycorrhizae or arbuscular mycorrhizae. Those fungi actually penetrate the cells and produce these little, like Christmas tree things, these arbuscules, and that's where the nutrient and water exchange happens. We don't know much about arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, but we do know they're probably the most important organisms on the planet. These are the ones that are real puppet masters that farm pretty much all the plants, and especially in these harsh areas like deserts and beaches and the Great Plains, mountaintops, etc., because arbuscular fungi can bring water into the plant from much further away. We don't know much about them because very few of them have ever been cultured, so we can't see them. They don't make mushrooms or fruit bodies. A lot of them don't seem to have sexual reproduction ever, and a lot of them that are known don't even have the genes for sexual reproduction. So it's unknown really very much about what their whole life cycle is about, but we do know that they're everywhere and super important because we can see their DNA left behind in the soil. So, you know, maybe another century from now we'll have a better handle, but just, you know, stay tuned. Arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi are probably the most important organisms on the planet and maybe the key to all life, and yet we don't even know anything about them. So what about the ectoms? The ectomycorrhizal fungi and these types of symbiosis have evolved many times. Ectomycorrhizal fungi include a lot of our favorites. So truffles, russulas, lactarius, amanitas of all kinds. Most boletes seem to be mycorrhizal, cortinarius, chanterelles, tricholomas like matsutake, lacarias. This is like a who's who of all of your favorite mushrooms, isn't it? So these are all mushrooms very familiar to us. The other thing about it, besides the fact that they are mycorrhizal, even some morels are mycorrhizal. The thing about it is, besides what's really cool is them benefiting the plants, being mutualists. The other thing about it is when your friends ask you, you know, I don't know what it is with these chanterelles and king boletes and truffles. They're so expensive, why not just farm them, grow them in a box like field mushrooms? Well, you can't just grow them. They don't rot stuff. You could grow its host plant, maybe, where you live, and then maybe you'll get fruit bodies, but that's, you know, a bigger trick. So people are starting to have success growing European truffles in the New World, but they had to bring those plants over and make the habitat favorable, the soil pH and all of that sort of business, wait like 15, 20 years, and some people are actually having luck getting European truffles growing here. But you can't grow them in a box like field mushrooms and button mushrooms and things like that. They don't grow in compost. The mycorrhizal fungi are pretty widespread. Most plant groups, in fact, probably every plant group, except for brassicaceous things, like the mustards and things like that, pretty much every plant group seems to have obligate association with fungi, and it seems for sure every group of trees, every species of tree seems to have obligate fungi attached to them. And likewise, the fungi that we see here that are mycorrhizal, they can't just grow everywhere, they have to grow only where their specific hosts are. So, you know, it goes both ways. Okay, so just 3 or 4 last slides of some weird things that we thought maybe were mycorrhizal, but maybe we're not so sure anymore. And some of these are things that you've probably seen. In fact, some we saw today, Aaron and I in the woods. Have you ever seen this mushroom before? This is the ash bolete, Gyrodon merulioides. So this is super common, or it was super common in the Midwest and the East where I live, because white ash trees pretty much the dominant tree in a lot of forests and also on people's lawns, cities, everywhere. And this mushroom, this bolete, the ash bolete, super common with white ash trees. And again, you wouldn't have to go in the forest to see it. They're on everybody's lawn in late summer, early fall. And if they're out in a profusion. There'll be lots of specimens, and they get great big, almost dinner plate size. It's a great big bolete, kind of gray, brown on top, with these kind of weird, veiny looking pores underneath. And, you know, as all mushroom field guides said at one time, it's a bolete, so it's mycorrhizal, must grow with trees. Turns out this isn't actually growing with trees. This came as a shock to some friends of mine when a few years ago I was the chief mycologist at the Colorado Mushroom Fair that the Colorado Mycological Society puts on, and the chief mycologist every once in a while because it often coincides with right before the Telluride Mushroom Festival, and I'm always in Telluride for that. Anyways, so I pull up at near the Botanic Garden and park along a street, and colleagues that were with me that were other mycologists, we hop out and we're racing in to get to the show. And I said, oh cool, here's some white ash trees that were planted here. Oh, and cooler still, there's ash boletes right beneath them. You know about these, right? And they're like, well, of course, everyone in the East knows about ash boletes. It's super, super common. Everyone knows everything about them. And I'm like, well, what's their partner? What do they do in nature? Ash trees, right? They're ash boletes, and they're a bolete. I said, actually, you know what? They're not attached to ash trees. They always seem to be fruiting near them, but they're not attached. I said, I'll show you something really cool that they are attached to. So I dug these up on this person's lawn, and this is my photo. And yeah, you're probably thinking, what's going to happen next? So just a couple minutes after this photo was taken, yeah, this lady came out hysterical, screaming at me for digging up stuff on her lawn and throwing shoes and stuff at us. So if you've been in this club a long time, that has happened to you. You've picked mushrooms on someone's lawn. For the newbies in the club, this will happen to you because you're driving by and you can't help yourself when you see a king bolete or something on a lawn. It's just going to waste. So, or a hericium on a tree on someone's property, it's just going to waste. So I dug these up and I said, if you fish around the base of the stalk of these guys, you'll see something really cool. You'll see these little black peas. And those little black peas are a gall. The gall is formed by the fungus around its host. Its host is a little aphid that in the fall of the year is flying around and sniffs out white ash trees, and that's its only, that's what it does. It attaches to white ash trees and sucks juices, and that's all it does. So it lands on the stem of the tree and climbs down, burrows into the soil, attaches its little tiny aphid proboscis to the roots of the white ash tree and starts sucking away. This has gone on for millions of years, and all kinds of other pests too are trying to tap into the ash trees and olive trees. So the tree, of course, has mechanisms to pitch these things out. It has an immune system. There's other predators in the soil, nematodes, other bugs, etc. So these poor little aphids, they don't stand a chance, except they have an ace in the hole. This fungus is living in the soil, and when it sniffs out its aphid host, it says, great. And it grows around this little aphid and forms these really amazing little galls, and that's the secret to the success of the aphid that sucks on the white ash trees. More bizarre than that is each one of these mushrooms, which is quite big, is attached by presumably one single tiny, very thin hypha to one of these. And that's where all of this energy is coming from, you know, ultimately from the tree, but through this aphid. Isn't that hard to believe? There's a lot of things like that in the fungal kingdom. You should get this book and you'll have stories to amaze your friends with.
So the aphid is the go-between?
The aphid's the go-between, yeah.
Okay.
And there's, of course, fungi in the soil that tap into other mycorrhizal fungi. You know, there's Indian pipes and things like that that have their mycorrhizae, and they tap into other mycorrhizae and steal stuff, you know, on and on. I'll show a couple more boletes because I really like boletes. And plus these are interesting stories. Have you ever heard of this guy here? This is Boletus parasiticus. This is not super common anywhere in North America. It's probably slightly more common in the East than out here. Most of the time, frankly, when I see it, it's in Italy. I lead myco tours in Italy and other places like Turkey every year. In fact, Terry was just in Turkey with me picking piles of Caesar amanitas just a few weeks ago. Boletes too. It was outrageous. And I forget if we saw these. I know we saw these in the Dolomites before the Turkey tour. I see sclerodermas all the time without Boletus parasiticus. You'll never see the bolete without the scleroderma though. So what's going on here? Well, it's a bolete, so it's supposed to be mycorrhizal with a tree host, and sclerodermas are mycorrhizal. So a lot of mycologists for years and years and years waved it off as, well, the one's attached to the other, but they're probably both ultimately attached to the same tree host. They have to be because we know they're mycorrhizal. Well, we're not really sure anymore. Maybe the bolete really is a parasite on the scleroderma, but also some people say it might be the other way around. The scleroderma might actually be parasitizing the bolete, or maybe one is a mutualistic partner with the other, and then the other one is attached to the tree. So we're really not even sure, but for sure you can find these things, and it's pretty cool to see because you have the two together, even though we don't know exactly what's happening. Here's another situation with a bolete that seems to always fruit with Ammonita muscaria. We saw this one today in the woods. This is Chalcoporus piperatus. If you're new in the club, you'll probably see when people are helping you to learn mushrooms and identify them, smelling everything. A lot of mushrooms have peculiar smells that give away their species. They might be tasting them. This is a real good one to taste. For the regulars, don't tell them. For the new people, for sure you want to taste this one. It's a sensation. I'll give you a hint as to what it tastes like. It's called piperatus. So it may or may not be extremely peppery hot. Anyways, when you see this little bolete, and it never gets very big, it's always this little puny guy. When you see it, it's very often in the vicinity of Ammonita muscaria. So a lot of people forever, when they describe this in books, say fruits nearby because it has the same, it's a bolete, so it has to be mycorrhizal. It's probably fruiting nearby Ammonita muscaria because it has the same host and they fruit at the same time. Now we're not so sure. It seems that maybe this guy is a parasite on the Ammonita muscaria, or again, maybe it's some sort of a mutualistic partner. I think the jury's still out. We don't totally know. Anyways, you can still see it out right now. How about these guys here? You got to know what these are. Yeah, the genus Gomphidius. These are, in my opinion, some of the most pretty mushrooms. I definitely do not think they're hideous. I think Gomphidius is gorgeous. They have these cool gills that come down, and yeah, they have this slimy partial veil that covers the gills. You can see it here too. Covers the whole. What's that?
Is that organensis?
This is absolutely not Oregonensis, and I forget which one it is. I know it's not because this photo was taken in the Dolomites in Italy just a few weeks ago. So I forget which one it is. But it looks just like Oregonensis, doesn't it? It doesn't have the rosy red cap, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, you could probably call this Oregonensis of Italy. Maybe. So anyways, when you see these guys in the woods, and they're super common, even right now they're super common, you might see some other mushroom nearby. What other mushroom might be nearby these?
Suillus.
Yeah, Suillus. You usually see both together. And so again, a lot of people say, well, these are probably both mycorrhizal on the same host tree. But we're now pretty certain this is a parasite of Suillus species. And furthermore, another surprise was to learn that these gilled mushrooms here, these beautiful gills, really aren't agarics. They're actually boletes. Yeah, so they come from a long line of bolete ancestors that decided to make their pores probably get wider and wider and wider to the point where now they're really not even pores anymore. You just have these elongate walls of the pores that look a lot like gills. They have bolete spores, if you pop these dark spores under the scope, and then they're also kind of puffy on top like boletes, but otherwise they look like some sort of agaric. Anyways, they're very cool to see, and they're edible. You can eat Gomphidius.
Why would they not say that Suillus is the parasite on the Gomphidius?
I don't know, could be.
Oh.
Yeah, look into that.
Okay, that's my next project. All
The
right.
subject for the next
Yeah.
Mushroom Wonderland show.
Yeah.
I think it's a good topic.
All right.
So this has happened several times. Of course, there's the aborted Entoloma that was always known to get aborted when it was nearby this type of honey mushroom. You know, the honey mushroom, which is a parasite on trees, we knew whenever this aborted Entoloma abortivum, anytime it ever got near this honey mushroom, it would get attacked too and form these aborted forms, which are quite common in the fall in the Midwest and also in Europe. Turns out, someone actually looked into it and found it was actually the reverse. The aborted Entoloma is actually more correctly called the abortive Entoloma because it's the one attacking the honey mushroom, and those aborted things actually is pretty much aborted honey mushrooms. Pretty cool. And they're pretty tasty too. And you really shouldn't eat the aborted Entoloma on its own, but the aborted form is actually totally safe to eat, and people have been eating it for a long, long time. So this is the one last story, and this involves cordyceps. I have 3 photos to show cordyceps. Way back when I was a student, there was like one species of cordyceps, Cordyceps sinensis. Everybody knows about it. It's super important Chinese medicine herb type thing. Now, a few decades later, I'm dating myself, but a few decades later, there's like hundreds and hundreds of species of cordyceps. There's many families of cordyceps. It's been really amazing to see all of the research done on cordyceps. The vast majority of them are parasites on arthropods, all kinds of insects and spiders and things like that. But some of them parasitize other mushrooms. This is a deer truffle. I threw this photo in here because this mushroom is fairly common in some parts of the Midwest where I live, but most of North America you wouldn't see it, except out here in the Pacific Northwest. You'll also see it. Have you seen this deer truffle before? Yeah, Elaphomyces.
Found some up on Green Mountain.
Yeah, where all the bears are. I've heard.
Bears on Green Mountain?
I've heard,
Oh, yeah.
I've heard the place is just lousy with bears. Don't go there to pick king bullies. It's lousy with bears. Bears and other shenanigans.
Yes, yeah, there it is.
So this is a truffle that is not edible. No one collects it for food. It's got a great big thick skin on it, a big thick peridium, and inside's just kind of like powdery. Nobody collects this, but it's a cool truffle. It's mycorrhizal. It's a partner with the trees. It has a cool story. But if you're walking along in the woods and you see one of these little stalk things sticking out of the soil, don't just grab it and pull it out of the soil. Recognize that it's a cordyceps. It could be attached to anything, and dig down around it. And if you find the host of it, you'll be praised by your mushroom club for being a really good collector. Plus you get 2 species names for the list. And that's really all we're interested in when we do a foray, right? Is to have a big species list. So this cordyceps, unlike some of its brethren that attack arthropods, it attacks other mushrooms. And this is the one that you would see out here. This is the Italian one. Oh, so this is, I have a lot of shameless ads. Some of them were subliminal and you didn't even see them. But some are shameless ads for books or mycotours or whatever, so that's what some of these QR codes are. This mushroom here is the European version of the cordyceps that attacks a truffle. And when I came upon this guy, this doesn't look like much sticking up. You would think it was just a twig or something, but if you carefully excavate the soil, you can find the brightly colored rhizomorphs that a lot of these different cordyceps have, and then follow that to its host. So be it a bug or a truffle right down here. And it makes for nice photos, and everyone's excited to see cordyceps. The one cordyceps that everybody knew was this guy here, and I think this is probably a photo from Daniel Winkler. He's one of the world's authorities on this particular type of a Cordyceps sinensis, which is from the Himalayas part of the world, Tibetan Autonomous Region of China and Nepal, and this part of the world. This thing has been known, this is the mushroom here, and this is its host here, the ghost moth caterpillar. This has been known and collected for centuries, if not millennia, for traditional Chinese medicine. And most of it comes from the Tibetan Autonomous Region. If you're not familiar, this part of China, if it was still an independent country, would be one of the largest countries on earth. It's a huge, huge region in western China, and much of it has no trees. It's very dry, so it's prairie, like the Great Plains, basically. It's too dry for trees. But there are a lot of organisms there, including this ghost moth, and the ghost moth caterpillar, the juvenile part of the caterpillar, crawls along through the grass and munching on all sorts of different plants. And somehow, we're still not really sure, the cordyceps fungus, which is a parasite on this guy, its spores get into the caterpillar and germinate, start growing. The fungus begins digesting the caterpillar, its insides, but it would be disastrous if it killed the caterpillar before winter and then spring comes, because no reproduction, no stock would be made. So it's very careful to avoid sensitive organs. It's very careful to avoid the brain, etc. It digests away less sensitive parts of the organism. The caterpillar goes through several molts, getting bigger, bigger, bigger. At the end of the season, it digs down into the soil to pupate to turn into a moth the next season. Of course, make no mistake about it, in this case, that's not going to turn into a moth. It's game over. It's going to turn into a cordyceps. So here's what else happens that's pretty interesting. The cordyceps fungi are some of the zombifying fungi. So this caterpillar normally would want to dig down into the soil as deep as it possibly could because it gets very cold and freezes in the winter. It wants to be below the frost line. Also, it'll be head down, probably to keep its head down as far as it can too, to avoid freezing to death. During the pupation stage, overwintering, that's when it turns into a moth, and then next spring it's going to come out as an adult. The adults, like most adult arthropods, aren't around for very long. The only purpose is to reproduce, and then that's it. The juvenile stage is a lot longer lived than the adult. Well, this isn't going to happen here. The zombification will begin happening at the end of this growing season. The cordyceps fungus will produce basically caterpillar hormones and other stimuli that'll tell the caterpillar what to do and where to go and how to dig and everything. It'll tell the caterpillar, you're not going to dig down super, super deep. You can only dig so deep because I can only make a stalk so long. You're going to be not that deep under the soil. Also, you're not going to be head down like normally happens. You're going to be head up, which is more convenient for me because this stalk always emerges at the collar part where the head attaches to the body. This stalk then comes up out of the soil and then makes sexual spores which blow around, and then we don't know what happens next. Somehow it gets into the caterpillar. So you're probably going to ask, so this is really important to the people. They've been collecting it for centuries to be turned into Chinese medicine. In the Tibetan Autonomous Region, a collection of this is 85% of the GDP of the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Isn't it hard to believe? This is worth far more than gold by weight, far more. It's worth more than any other probably organic, natural living thing on the planet. I can't imagine what would be worth more. So you're probably saying, it must be pretty popular. A lot of people probably go looking for it. Yeah, every person goes looking for it. Every single person. When it's the season for this, every business stops, every school stops, everyone stops what they're doing. They leave and go up into the mountains and crawl side by side and pulling up these things to collect them because they're worth so much money to the families. It's the main part of their income. So now I know what you're going to ask next. It's worth so many millions of dollars, and these people don't make a whole lot of money. It must be like the Wild West, right? It is. It's like the Wild West. The buyers have all kinds of automatic rifles, and basically armies are there to protect the people that are buying and selling, because these are piles of millions of dollars, and people are around them that have like tens of dollars to their name, you know? So that's what's pretty amazing. The other thing about it that you're probably going to ask is, if it's so expensive and worth so much money, do you think at some point everyone is going to get collected and it's going to go extinct? I don't think so. So the moths that are not infected, they're safe. Nobody wants them because they're not producing this mushroom. The mushroom also, I think, is totally safe. I think it doesn't actually care about the moth and doesn't even need the moth. So I don't think either one's going to go extinct. And here's why. It was just discovered what the life cycle is of this fungus. You would think something worth so much money, everything would be known about it, right? It turns out it was just discovered a couple years ago what this fungus actually does as its life cycle. It probably doesn't care about the spores being blasted out into the atmosphere to get them into the caterpillar. The caterpillar was probably picking up the fungus by eating the plants, because the fungus is in some of the plants its whole life, all the time. It's an endophyte. This was just discovered. So scientists looked inside some of the plants that are growing in this area and found not just plant material in the plants, but fungi, and when they looked to see what the fungi were, it was cordyceps. So probably what happens is sometimes the caterpillar munching on the plants that are infected with the fungus, that's how they get the fungus in their bodies. The spores really may not have anything to do with it, and maybe it's a relic of a long, long time ago the fungus was making spores, and maybe they're not useful. Maybe they are useful. I don't really know. But what's really, really amazing to me as sort of a mycologist, evolutionary biologist, is to think this organism, this fungus, of course it's very successful at doing everything a fungus needs to do to make fungus cells and reproduce and all of the normal fungus business, but it also is really, really good at doing animal things, maybe even better at doing some animal things than the animal that hosts it. It gets inside of this caterpillar and can not only evade the immune system that the animal has, it can also produce all kinds of stimuli and signals and hormones that the caterpillar's cells think are its own. It can tell the caterpillar what to do and when to do it. That's amazing. But it turns out it lives most of the time, maybe all the time, inside of a plant doing what? We don't even know. It probably lives as an endophyte in the plant, producing plant hormones and things like that. Maybe imparts drought tolerance, like a lot of endophytes do. It's probably not a pathogen. We don't see any disease signs of the plants. It's probably benefiting the plant in some way. So it's just astounding. This organism can be sort of better at doing things of organisms in other kingdoms. Maybe all fungi are like that. They're obviously way smarter than us. They can trick us into doing their bidding and growing them and looking for them. So pretty cool. In any case, that's my last slide, and thanks for your time.